Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on tonight's webinar topic, which is breaking down events, how to spend your time and money wisely. Some of you may actually be receiving invitations to different recruiting events as we speak, so this might be something that is really, really directly connected to the experience that you're having in the recruiting process right now. So we're really excited to talk about it further. To give everyone a bit of a rundown on who I am personally, my name is Mike. I'm a senior recruiting analyst here at Sports Recruits. My role is specifically working with student athletes who are looking for additional support in the recruiting process, whether that be assistance with putting together recruiting video, help with the communication side of things. And a big one as well is trying to help people make decisions on what events are worth it, where you can find the best recruiting events, how to get in front of the coaches and programs that you have the most interest in. This is something that we talk a lot about with the families that I work with specifically. So we're really excited to give everyone here a little bit more insight on how you can make the most of any of those recruiting events that you might have coming up now, or maybe a little bit later on this year as well. In terms of the agenda of what we'll be talking about specifically tonight, we'll first start off by just identifying the different types of recruiting events that you'll most likely, or a lot of you probably have already started receiving invitations to. Another big thing that has really become a hot topic is the type of invitation that you receive. Is the invitation something that was personally sent to you by the coaching staff, or is this something that was sent as some sort of like form mass message that was sent out to a number of different student athletes? So we'll talk about different clues that you can look for that. We'll also talk about determining the value of an event, how you can make it worth it before and after in terms of your communication, and also making the most out of your trip at the same time as well. As always, we save some time for the end to answer any questions that anyone has, so feel free to utilize the Q&A box or the chat box for anything that you'd like us to cover directly. And also, for those of you who just signed up to Sports Recruits, not sure quite what we are, and you're interested in the different types of packages that we make available, I am going to put in the chat box right now a link to our calendar that will give you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the different packages that we provide. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll make sure to include that at least one more time before we wrap up tonight as well. But yeah, so let's go back. Let's get into it in terms of the different types of events that everyone could be on the lookout for, and some different clues that you can determine in terms of the types of events that might be worthwhile for you at this point in time. So the difference, keep in mind that some of the terminology here is sometimes interchangeable, so may not always be uniformly identified this way, but here are some of the different details that can give you an idea of why we define these events as such. So to start off, a prospect day, this is something that a lot of you are probably receiving invitations for. Typically, that is going to be an event that one school is specifically hosting on their own campus. That's going to give them an opportunity to see student athletes that have an interest in competing for that program. Schools handle prospect days a bit differently. If there's, sometimes they narrow it down to a particular recruiting graduation class. They might have 2 graduation classes. Some schools will be a little bit more open-minded and actually have ages 12 to 17 or 14 to 18. It really does vary in that regard, but prospect day is the best way that you can identify that, is if it's a school that has it listed on their website. If you go to the Harvard lacrosse website, if you go to the Princeton soccer website, and they actually are marketing it as something that they're hosting, they're going to be the one school that's going to be there. That is going to be a prospect day that you can have some interest in. It's going to be mostly about evaluating the student athletes there. So we have it listed as a 75-25. A lot of events, depending on the sport that you're involved in, there might be some education in there as well. For reference, sometimes what we see a lot of, particularly for soccer or lacrosse, is the first half or the first portion of the event will be more drills and practice based, and then it usually ends with some sort of scrimmage before everyone is set to go home. So that's just a quick breakdown of a prospect day. And again, typically that's going to be one school that is hosting the event on their own campus. A camp or a clinic is a little bit different, where a school could host it on their own campus, but maybe they invited other programs to also attend, or there could be some sort of event organizer involved that has a list of colleges that they want to find and evaluate the talent that is going to their different events. So a camp or a clinic is going to be much more educationally based. There is going to be some evaluation as well. But also there's going to be a higher amount of schools that could be in attendance at these types of events, to keep that in mind too. The camps and clinics that we typically receive invitations for, or the athletes that I work with that receive invitations for, it's more so to have a chance to be seen by schools with similar backgrounds. For example, one that comes to mind is there's a few sports out there that will have a high academic high academic camp that gives you a chance to compete in front of multiple schools, within a similar conference or within a certain amount of selectivity. You'll also see showcases like that, which I'll get into next here. But camps and clinics are going to be more so based on giving you a chance to potentially work with college coaches. Maybe not, it might not even be college coaches, but people who know the game well, who are trying to help you become a better player, more so than it is about seeing you as a potential recruit. That's more so on the clinic side, I would say. Clinics typically are more known as something that's just going to be more based on just trying to provide you with instruction and good practice drills and trying to create those good habits to become a better player. Campus sometimes utilizes that terminology as well, but it is a chance to at least be seen by a lot of these coaches. So that's kind of the definition that we've put together for a camp or a clinic. But again, keep in mind that these terms are sometimes interchangeable. Showcases are going to be much more focused on the evaluation piece of working with student athletes. If you see anything marketed as a showcase, that typically means that there's going to be a high number of colleges that are going to be in attendance. You can see the price ranges that we include in here. Again, this is all kind of based on what we've seen in terms of the events that we have our student athletes end up looking at. But showcases, the best part about those is that if you are in a position where, you have 10, 12, 15 schools, maybe more on your list, it's going to be really difficult for you to sign up for each individual prospect day. Some of these showcases may have 5, 7, 10 schools that you have direct interest in, and it's going to give you an opportunity to be seen by multiple schools in one day. It's always a great idea, and we'll talk more about the communication in terms of reaching out to those schools prior and making a note of saying thank you to anyone who you've seen. Tournaments are going to work in a pretty similar way as well. But showcases are typically going to be something where you are going to have a chance to work with the coaches, maybe in some sort of one-on-one environment, maybe in small groups, but there is going to be that opportunity to play in a live game scenario, depending on the sport that you're in, which is going to make things a bit easier for you to, identify who's there. Maybe one of the college coaches are actually going to be a coach that you're working with specifically for the day. You might have 2 or 3 games that you're playing. That's kind of the makeup of how showcases will typically work. And again, that's going to be more so for a situation where if you do want to try and maximize your overall reach in the amount of schools that you could be seen by on one particular date. And last up, the tournaments. This is something where it might not be necessarily involved with college coaches, but college coaches are going to receive an invitation to some tournaments. If you are on a very active and very well-known club team for the sports that you're involved in, there's a good chance that you're going to be going to tournaments that college coaches really like to attend. They know that there's going to be a lot of talent there. They might have good relationships with certain clubs and organizations, and that's why they want to be on the sidelines during some of these larger tournaments for sure. Depending on the club that you're on, it might be built into your club dues in terms of how much these types of events will cost on top of anything else that you've already paid for. And tournaments could have sometimes 75, 100 schools in attendance, depending on the size of the venue and how many, and how many student athletes are going to be attending as well. So in tournaments, there's not really going to be any education. You're typically going to an event like that with a team that you compete with, where the first 3 that we went over, those are typically going to be something that you sign up for individually. So I would say that's really the biggest difference between a showcase, a clinic, at a prospect day versus a tournament. Is a tournament, you're still going to be in that mindset where you're playing with, your teammates. You're going to be on a team that you're comfortable being around. Where these prospect days and showcases, for example, you might be in that scrimmage environment, but it's not, you might be meeting a teammate for the first time 2, 3 minutes before the whistle blows for your first game. So that's where a lot of these events are going to be a bit different, but that's why we wanted to give everyone kind of a clear definition of, of what your expectation could be if you sign up for any of these types of recruiting events. If anyone has questions about that, like I said, feel free to utilize the Q&A box and the chat portion as well. Sorry, I lost my screen share there for a second. Just bear with me and I'll pull that right back up. Okay. To keep things moving along here as well. So again, this is the breakdown of the different recruiting events. We'll now talk about the different types of invites that you could potentially receive, whether it be from organizations or from college coaches directly. So we'll start off with the personal email invite. This is ultimately what you're hoping to receive in some way, shape, or form. Receiving a direct personal invite from a college coach typically means that you're in a position where they have become aware of who you are. You've somehow gotten on their radar based on a previous event you went to, a highlight reel that you put together. They had a conversation with your club coach or a high school coach, for example. Those are the types of things that are going to give you a bit of a heads up on, okay, this is something that actually looks to be a little bit more direct and it's meant specifically for me. Now, keep in mind, there are there are softwares and there are coaches and programs that have gotten really good at making a lot of their camp invitations look to be really personal, and that's not always the case. But some of the things that you can look out for is, does it look to be that it's actually is written and it's not something that is built from some sort of like copy and paste type of template that some coaches will use? Is it something that directs specifically, is it identifying something they specifically know about you that isn't going to be included in other, in something that wouldn't be a non-personal invite? One thing that will sometimes come up is, hi Chris, we loved what we saw from you at the XYZ showcase earlier this summer. We'd love to have another chance to evaluate you if you end up coming to our camp. That's sometimes a way that you can actually have a better understanding of this is something that is more of like a legitimate invitation. Another thing to keep in mind as well is your age. If you are someone who is currently in the class of 2028 or the class of 2027, Division One and Division Two schools within the NCAA are pretty limited in what they can even say to you at this point in time. Talking about emails that you could be receiving. So if you're receiving an invitation as a 27 or a 28, more often than not, that means that that is something that somehow was set up as some sort of like automatic message sent to you, because that is one of the few things that those coaches are allowed to provide you at this point in time. But again, if you are someone who's a 2025 or a 2026 and you're receiving a camp invite and they're addressing something specific and they're actually talking about things that are uniquely directly affected within your recruiting process, those are the types of emails that you want to receive for this event. You absolutely should respond whether you are able to attend or not able to attend to this particular event. If it's a school you're not interested in, just say, hey, unfortunately, I'm not able to make it, but I'll be on the lookout for other events down the road, because you never want to rule a school out until you 100% know for sure it's not the place for you. And if it's a school that you know that you can make it, try and make sure that you register as quickly as you can, and make sure that you make a note of your attendance the week leading up to the event. And that's something we'll talk about in a few more slides as well. So again, those are some different clues that you guys can utilize in terms of identifying what event invitations are personal. But keep in mind, coaches are getting better and better every day at what these emails look like. And it's sometimes it could be pretty difficult to determine if it's something that was sent out in a mass message or it is something that is specifically directly for you. The mass email, usually there are some other clues that do make it a bit easier. For example, if there is some sort of PDF attachment, or if there is some sort of imaging like you see here, for example, you can see that they actually included some info like, with summer in full swing, I hope your season is treating you well. That those are pieces of that are trying to make it look a bit more personal, but ultimately there's a lot in here that's going to give you kind of the heads up that this is something that is being sent out to a large group of people. If your name only appears as Dear Blank, that's usually something that could end up making things a little bit better for you. You can see the terminology and the sentence that they use in the message is something that isn't necessarily directly towards one particular student athlete. It is going to be pretty general. And it's not necessarily a bad thing if you receive a mass email. It just means that you might not want to automatically sign up right away. And it doesn't necessarily mean there's direct interest from that program each and every time. You may still be on that coach's radar. Maybe it's just set up within their emailing system and how they operate that's not something that they're going to do for that particular event. But it definitely confirms that you are listed in the database. Maybe you filled out a recruiting questionnaire. Maybe they have access to your info from a previous event that you went to. But this is something that is typically, if it looks like this, there's a good chance that it is going to be something that was put together to be sent with the goal of sending it to a lot of people to try and get a number of athletes sign up for one event. One thing to keep in mind about recruiting events is that colleges, college programs in particular, it is a business for them at the end of the day. Having these events and making sure that they have as many registrants as possible is sometimes a great revenue stream for these programs. So keep in mind, an invitation doesn't always mean direct interest, and that's really the whole point that we're trying to make, particularly when you are getting these mass emails. So yeah, if anyone is continuing to have questions about how to kind of make those, identify those differences, let's say, just make sure you write in the chat and we'd be happy to help you out with that before we wrap up tonight. Okay, and now determining the value of an event, particularly when you are signing up for events that may have one school attending. So we're talking about our prospect camps, we're talking about potentially a clinic that might be going on. You want to make sure that if it is one school, it's a school that you do have direct interest in. Is it on your target list? Does that school seem to be a good fit for you academically, socially, geographically? We get a lot of people who end up getting invitations to these camps, but they end up being on the complete other side of the country. Is it going to be worth that time, travel, logistics, and finances to fly out from New York to California, stay in a hotel for 2 to 3 nights just to be seen by a coach for 2 to 3 hours? You might be in a situation where that is the case. And yes, it is going to be worth your time, but there might be situations where you're going to be better off waiting for another opportunity at some point down the road. It's also important to try and have that inner conversation with yourself or rely on your athletic advocates like a club coach or a high school coach to, is this a school? Is this a program that is going to be a possibility for me? Can I play at the Division I level? Is the NESCAC conference going to be a good fit for me based on my academics and where they're at now? These are the types of questions that you should be asking yourself, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that you're increasing your exposure with schools that you are a really good fit for, whether that be based on how you are in the field and also the academic component as well. One of the best parts about going to these one school events, though, is that it does give you a unique perspective in seeing the campus, seeing the facilities. Sometimes they might even have some sort of campus tour built into the event at times, which is a really great thing to take advantage of. But those are the types of things that you definitely want to look at before you just blindly sign up for an event. And also, have you had previous communication with this coaching staff? Have you introduced yourself? Have you made your highlight reel available to them? Have you received any activity on sports recruits or IMLCA recruits or IWLCA recruits or NFHCA recruits for our field hockey athletes? Have you gotten any sort of indication that this program, this coaching staff is aware of who you are? You want to make sure whenever you go to any recruiting event that you're on the predetermined list of athletes that coach is planning on evaluating. So whether that's one school or an event with multiple schools attending, that's always something that should be a topic of conversation and something that you should really be striving for. When you're talking about events with several schools attending, you want to make sure that, again, a lot of these same questions. Do I have interest in multiple of these schools? Have I had that previous communication? Do the schools that are attending this event match what I've been told in terms of what I should be striving for to play at the next level? And also look up reviews of the event, right? There are event organizers out there that do a really phenomenal job, and year out, they're giving student athletes phenomenal opportunities to increase their exposure and have a chance to be seen by multiple coaches in one shot, and ends up being a great experience for them. But again, not every business is perfect, right? There might be certain events out there that market themselves as one of the best showcases or best clinics in the country, and then you end up going there and just something seems off. Maybe there's not as many coaches as they originally said, or maybe there ends up being more athletes, so it is tough to separate yourself. So rely on people that you know who have gone to previous events, read reviews, do some research, do your homework, ask the coaches directly what events they think might be worthwhile if you are in a position where you're having a bit of a back and forth with them. Again, we really want to make sure that you're in a situation where you're not necessarily just signing up blindly for events. Really just make sure you take some time, do your research, and make sure that it is something that is a trustworthy source to maximize that exposure, because ultimately that is the whole goal of attending these different types of recruiting events as well. Okay, to take it a little bit further, how you want to make it worth it. Communication before and after is crucial, and we're also going to talk about the different things you can do during the event as well. So prior to the event, ideally, you want to make sure that you reach out to any coaches that are going to be in attendance. Make sure that you have video available on your profile. Make sure that you have your grades or your transcript, especially if you are I would say a junior or senior in high school, 9th and 10th grade, depending on what you have access to, it could be a benefit as well. And also, if it is an event like a tournament, for example, where you do have multiple games and you're going to be at different fields at different times, make the coach's job as easy as you can and send that over in an email prior. Again, we understand, we usually say 7 to 10 days is kind of like the best time frame to send out that information. We understand that you're not always going to have access to that info a week prior. So under your control, it's okay to wait a couple of days if you are going to get access to a schedule a little bit longer, a little bit closer to the start date, but really want to make sure that we're avoiding reaching out to college coaches the night before an event begins, because there's no guarantee they're going to have a chance to access that and actually make that decision to, further evaluate you during the event itself. During the event, obviously, you want to compete well. You want to, if you're going to a prospect camp, you want to make sure you explore the campus. If it is something that isn't at a particular school, you want to make sure that understand that recruiting is happening at all times, even when you're not actively in a position where you're playing, right? People on the sidelines are always getting evaluated. There's, one of the things that I've heard from conversations with college coaches is that one kind of red flag or something that they look for is if they see a student athlete and their parent or guardian is holding their equipment for them, that ends up being something that just rubs a lot of coaches the wrong way. So keep in mind, you're not just getting evaluated and recruited while you're on the field and while you're competing. There also are going to be things that are getting looked at from the intangible perspective. Are you a good leader? Do you have good body language? How are you reacting after you're called for a penalty that might not be correct? These are all things that are going to go into the evaluation process for these college coaches. And also after the event, you want to make sure you're reaching out to coaches, thanking them for their time. Find out if there's any next steps, if there's anything else that you can do to set yourself up for success with their program. Maybe even ask for feedback also. One of the things that's nice about when you go to a prospect camp, even if you are a 2027 or a 2028, regardless of the division of the school, they are able to provide you with direct feedback on how you performed. So they wouldn't necessarily be able to relate it back to, hey, if you work on this skill, you'll be someone that will recruit further. But they are able to say, hey, Mike, we think that you played well. We think that your shooting ability is something that is really impressive, but we would love to see you work on your stick skills moving forward. That's the type of feedback that coaches are allowed to send back. They're not required to do it by any means, but regardless of your age, if you are at a prospect camp, coaches are allowed to send you back feedback, just to give everyone a heads up here. And that's specifically at a prospect camp that they host on their own campus. Tournaments or showcases that are not on their campus, that would not be the case, just to give everyone a heads up there. So what to say to a college coach, kind of referred to some of this already, right? 7 to 10 days before the event when possible. If you know your schedule is coming 3 days before or 4 days before, totally fine, right? We just want to make sure that we send something ahead of time. One thing to keep in mind too, because we hear from college coaches about this all the time, if your schedule gets updated or switched or a game time or a game field is switched around, do not feel the need to reach out to the coach to send them that schedule update. More often than not, I'd say 95% of the time, maybe probably close to 100% of the time, events are going to do a really good job of keeping coaches up to date on if there are any scheduling changes. So that we've heard college coaches say directly, that is the number one type of message that they don't want to receive anymore. So take our advice on that. If you send your schedule, whatever it is available at that point in time. But if at 11 p.m. the night before you end up finding out that a game's starting 15 minutes later, or it's moving over one field, do not feel the need to send that update. That information will be made available to the college coaches who are going to be in attendance. And again, after the fact, thank you, coach. I really appreciate you stopping by and watching me, especially if you've earned that feedback. If you're at a prospect camp and maybe you've worked individually with a certain coach at a certain point, make sure to shout that coach out. And again, ask for feedback, understand when feedback is allowed versus when feedback isn't, and always make sure that you are expressing legitimate interest in their program. That's something that really could separate yourself. And I feel like most people end up doing a really good job on reaching out to coaches beforehand, but sending out something after the fact is something that ends up getting lost for a lot of student athletes. So if you want to separate yourself and you really want to instill with that coaching staff that you have legitimate interest in their school, that's a really great way to kind of go above and beyond, is reaching out after, identifying something that happened during the event. If you had any personal conversations or even just like a quick chat at some point, really great way to try and, make yourself more visible with these coaches at the end of the day. For those of you who have access to Sports Recruits, if you have a pro account with our built-in messaging system, we make it as easy as possible to contact any college coaches that you would like. Simply works by typing in the name of the school that you're interested in reaching out to, as you can see on the screen right here. Any coach that you would like to contact is going to populate. It's going to be taken directly from their athletic staff directory page. And we're going to include automatically a link to your Sports Recruits profile that's going to give those coaches the ability to look at anything that you've added to that recruiting profile so far. So again, if you are reaching out before events, have a built out profile, have some video available, have the rest of your schedule added on there. Those are all ways of making sure that especially if you're reaching out to a coach prior to an event, give them the opportunity to evaluate you further before they're seeing you in person. Those are all great things that you can do to really maximize that opportunity. And also throughout the event, especially there's going to be certain times where coaches might be looking at recruiting profiles, and you actually could receive notifications letting you know that certain schools are looking at your info as you're playing on the field. One other pro tip as well, do not reach out to a coach after you receive a view from them saying, hey, coach, I just saw that you looked at my profile. Nice to meet you. That sometimes can rub coaches the wrong way. Not every situation. There might be coaches out there that aren't as concerned about that, but keep in mind, we want coaches to feel that you are showing legitimate interest in their school. If you're citing the reason why you're reaching out to that program is because they viewed your profile, that's not showing that you had legitimate interest from the start. So feel free to contact the school, but send something that reads more of like an introductory message. Don't cite that as the reason that you're contacting them. You want to make sure that it is coming from a place of that you have done your homework, you've done your research, and hey, after looking into your program a bit further, it does look like this would be a good fit for me. So just another thing to keep in mind if you are receiving activity during recruiting events. And last up here before we get to our Q&A, making the most out of your trip. There's going to be situations sometimes where you go to these recruiting events and it might be a little bit further from home, but there might be a number of schools or a number of campuses that are close by that this might be your one chance to actually see some of them. So if you are going to a prospect camp, let's say in Boston, and then there actually ends up being a school, 20, 30, 45 minutes close by, and you actually are staying there the whole weekend, try and look up and go on the school website to see if there's any campus tours. If you schedule a campus tour, reach out to that coaching staff, let them know when your tour is, and maybe there's a chance that you actually can stop by the coach's office to introduce yourself. If there's any open houses, if there's any sort of campus event, maybe there's a game that you can attend. I was actually working with an athlete of mine recently where he was in a certain area of the country for a prospect camp. It was going to be a multi-day event. They were going to have some free time, so he was able to actually attend a couple of games for some of the other colleges that are in that general area. So you want to talk about maximizing your trip, getting a chance to see multiple campuses. Campus tours are typically something that you're not even going to be charged for, so it's just a matter of getting there is really going to be the most important piece. But that's always a great way to really try and maximize those opportunities, especially if you are traveling a long way and you're going to have limited chances of actually being in that area of the country. All right, so we just went through a lot of info, guys, and thank you so much for being patient as we went through all of that, because I know some of you wrote in some questions towards the beginning here. But yeah, we'll do our best to address as many of those questions as we can with the time that we have left now, but hopefully that gave everyone some valuable info in terms of how to go about signing up for events, looking for personal invitations, the different types of recruiting events, and everything that we went over. Once again, I'm going to put in this chat box here a link to our if anyone is interested in learning more about potential packages that are available by Sports Recruit. So if you want to be able to contact college coaches directly, that can be a great place for you to get started and start talking to our recruiting specialist. So feel free to take a look at that. And also, this webinar is getting recorded. So you will automatically be sent a recording of this as soon as it becomes available sometime tomorrow. Okay, and let's see what questions that we have that came in here. All right. So someone wrote in, how do you find out the reputation of a camp and showcase? Typically, it's going to be easier to find out the reputation of an event if it is a specific event organizer, right? Maybe there's a company out there. Maybe they're known for scheduling multiple events throughout the year. Usually, if you just go online, there's going to be reviews written, people talking about their experiences. A lot of event websites, especially if they're strong in what they do, they'll actually have a testimonial area on their website that gives you a chance to see what people are saying about them. More likely than not, if it's on their website, it's going to be positive, but still really valuable info to get, right? But yeah, but if you are in a situation where you know people who have gone to events that you're considering attending, reach out to them. Hey, what do you think of this? Was it worth it? Did you have good exposure? Was it tough to differentiate yourself? Was there too many athletes and not enough coaches? Those are the types of things that you can really look into and try and make sure that you are attending events that are giving you the best opportunities. All right, we have a few more questions that popped in here, so I will do my best over the next 5 minutes or so is going to work. Let's see. So someone just wrote in and said, there's someone who's in the sophomore in the graduating class of 2027. How come college coaches can't directly reach out to me? So let me clarify that a little bit further. So there are some limitations in how college coaches can communicate with student athletes, specifically for NCAA Division I and Division II programs. Their limitations are based on, they don't want people getting recruited too early on in the process. So don't be discouraged in terms of your communication. The rules are set in place specifically for how college coaches can operate. So, for example, if you're a 2027 or a 2028, you're going to a recruiting event, you're reaching out and you're sending your schedule. That's still a great thing to do, but just understand the type of response that you would receive from a coach in that situation is most likely going to be some sort of automatic reply. that's going to read something along the lines of, hey, thank you for your interest in XYZ University. Due to NCAA recruiting restrictions, we're unable to speak to you further. However, here's a link to our upcoming prospect camps that we're hosting. That is going to be the very typical type of response that you get if you are reaching out to schools earlier on in the recruiting process, but do not be discouraged in terms of starting that contact, especially if you are going to recruiting events. Just know there are going to be some limitations in how coaches can directly contact you when you're earlier on in this stage. Okay. Someone wrote out, this is actually a really interesting question that comes up a lot. Is it a good idea to skip a tournament to go to a prospect day that a coach has sent interest in you directly? And this particular athlete is a lacrosse player. Really good question. And I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. Very difficult to just say yes or no based on that info, right? A couple of things that I would consider when making that decision. Am I going to have an opportunity to be seen by college coaches at the tournament that I'm considering skipping? What type of interest and what type of communication have I had with that school that is inviting me to a prospect camp? Did they tell me where I currently stand on the recruiting list? And is this something that could get me over the hump and potentially receive an offer or, really kind of make a significant step in some way, shape, or form? So I think you really have to reassess and really try and evaluate those things for yourself before you make that call. Obviously, you want to talk to your, if you're going with a club coach, for example, you want to make sure you talk to them about it, that, hey, I'm not sure if this is something that's worth doing. There might be certain coaches and certain programs that would be, supportive in your attempt of trying to be seen by those schools. And there might be situations where your team just needs you that particular weekend, right? So OSHA had more of a concrete answer for you, but it is something that you really have to handle case by case, I would say. Okay, let's see. Okay. Ooh, interesting. The role of a parent at a prospect day. Should you be watching, or would that be viewed negatively by coaches? And this is for a parent of a 2026 boys soccer player. Parents, you can you could make an impact at prospect camps, but ultimately we don't want you to make too much of an impact at recruiting events, and that's definitely the case for college coaches as well. Definitely, if you're there to support, if it seems to be the type of event where attendance is available and it's something that's encouraged, absolutely you should be there and support your student athlete without a doubt. But in terms of reacting to a bad call from a referee or trying to start conversations with college coaches while they're on the sideline, those are all things that we do not recommend doing. Ultimately, if you're the person who is being the most aggressive in your communication with the college coach, that's something that could end up raising some questions about the student athlete. How come, if this athlete is so interested in my school, how come their mom or their dad is the person who is trying to communicate with us right now? So, more often than not, I would say, really just try and be more in the background would be the best way I can describe it. That's going to be the safest way to go about attending these recruiting events, especially if it is encouraged that people are going to be there. For example, if you're at a tournament, there's probably going to be a ton of parents and a ton of people attending these games. But again, just try and stick to supporting the team that you're there for, the student athlete that you're there for, and you should be in a good spot based off of that. All right. Looks like we have time for one or two more here, guys. And again, thank you everyone for who is writing these in. It's helpful to see what everyone is looking to get some assistance with here. Let's see. Let's just have a couple of repeats here, guys. Just looking for something we haven't answered just yet. How do you identify coaches and recruiters on the sideline if they don't introduce themselves? And when you follow up with your email, what do you say in those situations? Really great question. So if they're not necessarily introducing themselves, more often than not, a way to identify a scout or a coach would be if they're wearing some sort of like team issued gear. Are they wearing a hat with a certain college logo, a sweatshirt or a t-shirt, whatever it might be? That's usually a good starting point. Do they have some sort of paperwork in front of them? Are they inside of the ropes? There's certain lacrosse events that I've been to in the past where there's certain areas and certain locations that coaches are allowed where the parents and the teams and the athletes would not be allowed. So those are different things that could be beneficial there. I would say on top of that, it's in terms of what your communication should be after the fact. Maybe you heard from someone else that they were watching that particular game. You could even phrase it sometimes, hey, I'm not sure if you attended any of these games, but this was my schedule this past weekend. If you were able to watch me, let me know if you have any feedback. And sometimes video will become available after these events as well. You actually might receive certain footage and you might be able to grab certain clips. So even if a coach didn't see you play live, it could be worth reaching out after the fact and just giving them a heads up that you pulled some of your best clips from that event. So those are a few different ways that you can handle that. All right, looks like we have time for one more here, everybody. So let me do my best to try and get that done here quickly. All right. Okay. Sorry, guys. Looks like they're getting just a couple of repetitive questions here. I just want to make sure that we answer something that we haven't touched base on just yet. Okay, we'll finish up on this one. So someone wrote in that they hear that being persistent in the recruiting process is important, but how much is too much? I wish I can give you, I guess, an exact number of how many times it's okay to reach out to a school or a program before, before it's time to, maybe move on and focus on other places. I think the biggest thing is, persistence is okay, but if a school has explicitly said that they are done recruiting for your position in grad year, at that point, it is not worth continuing that conversation. Sometimes there might be an event, the situation where, they said, hey, we're no longer actively recruiting your position in grad year. If it's a school that is your number one option and you'd be willing to walk on or, attempt to try out for the team if you were to end up being accepted there, for example, that would be like one last opportunity to potentially reach out. But I would say, you should feel pretty comfortable reaching out to schools. Again, and usually the way that I look at it is if you're reaching out, sending an email, don't be repetitive in what you're sending. Don't say, hey, coach, did you see my last message? The best rule of thumb that we go by here is making sure that you include new information in any message that you send to college programs that's going to assist in their evaluation. So as long as you're providing new video, new events that you signed up for, new academic information, just to name a few different things, those are always going to be really beneficial to just to try and keep that conversation going. And then if you get to a point where I would say, your fourth, fifth message, and maybe you're in end of junior year, start of senior year, then be a little bit more direct and say, hey, coach, I just want to see are you still actively recruiting my position in grad year? But that's not something that you should do until you've had multiple chances of contacting them beforehand. So. All right, everyone. I think that is unfortunately all the time that we have left. I see people asking about the recording. Once again, just by registering for this webinar, you will automatically receive this recording at some point tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that. You can also follow and subscribe to our YouTube channel where we post all of our recordings just to give everyone a heads up as well. Again, feel free to utilize that chat box if anyone is interested in trying to learn more about the different packages that Sports Recruits provides. I just threw it in there one more time for you all. But again, thank you all so much. Really fantastic questions tonight. And if there's anything else that you guys would like to, learn more about, certain topics, certain areas of a discussion, just reach out to us at help@sportsrecruits.com. We're always trying to make the best and most valuable information available to you. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening. And we look forward to having you on another webinar sometime soon. Have a great night, everyone.